Hey, it's Levi Bloom from Bloom Bike Shop. Today we're going to be working on our front derailleur. And the front derailleur is good to work on in case you have poor shifting or if the chain starts falling off the chain rings on either side. It's probably because of your front derailleur, and if you readjust it, you can fix all those problems pretty easily. Okay, so the front derailleur is all about setting the limits. The limit how far the chain can go to the inside and how far it can go to the outside. And you want just enough space in there so that the chain can shift properly and not grind on the gears, but not enough space that it can fall off. So let's get started working on the bike here. And what we're going to do is we want to shift on to your smallest gear, your small chain ring, and your big cog. So you just make sure you're shifted up into that gear. And that's where we're at. So I'm going to grab my screwdriver. So that's about all we need right here. And we're going to get into the limit settings on here. So to start with the lower limit screw, first of all we want to find the screws, which you'll see right here. Sometimes they're positioned horizontally, sometimes vertically. And your lower limit screw is either on top when they're vertical like this, or it'll be towards the inside of the bike if the screws are horizontal. What you want to do, let's say your chain is grinding against the inside of the front derailleur cage. To fix that, we want to slightly loosen the lower limit screw just a little bit, maybe a quarter turn or a half turn. And that, by turning it counterclockwise to loosen it, that gives you a little more space in there. And all you have to do is turn your cranks and see if you hear it grinding. And I didn't hear any grinding, so I think we're okay right there. If you have a little gap in there, you're set. You want to make sure the gap is just big enough that the chain can clear it. If you have a huge gap in there, you can actually go ahead and turn the screw clockwise just a little bit, and that will decrease the clearance, which, just in case, let's say your chain is falling off onto the bottom bracket shell, you'll probably want to turn this clockwise to tighten it, and that should prevent your chain from falling off. Okay, so that looks good. We're going to shift to your big gear so that we can work on the outer limit setting. So I'm just going to go ahead and shift here. And we're shifting into our biggest gear, like this. Okay, now, let's see, we have the chain in the biggest gear. And now we're going to get to the outer limit screw, which, opposite the lower limit screw, is going to be on the bottom right here, if it's vertical, or if the screws were positioned horizontally, it would be the one on the outside. So, let's say you shift up to your big gear and the chain is rubbing a little bit. Well, what you're going to do in that case is you'll get your outer limit screw and you will turn it counterclockwise just a little bit to loosen up the limit, and that'll give you a little bit more room in there so whenever you turn it, the chain doesn't grind on the front derailleur cage. Now let's think about the opposite problem. If you're shifting up to your big ring and your chain just falls right out on the crank arm, well, you want to decrease that limit. So what we're going to do is you'll turn your outer limit screw clockwise just a little bit to tighten it. And that way, whenever you shift to the outside, your chain shouldn't have enough room to fall off. It's just like on the inside, you want enough room for clearance, but you don't want too much room because then the chain will just fall off. And if you check it by turning your cranks, it should not rub, and you should also be able to shift back down there, and then we'll try shifting up again, and you see it shifts up onto the big ring and doesn't fall off. So the front derailleur adjustment looks pretty good right now. One thing you want to do is once you set the lower limit and then the upper limit, you'll go back to the lower limit, and that way and just check to make sure that that still works. It should, but sometimes you'll have to just play with the adjustment a little bit to get it perfect. So now ideally what we'll do is take the bike out for a little test ride, just run through the gears and make sure it shifts properly. And if it doesn't, then you just come back here and start over with the adjustments. Sometimes it does take a couple times to get it perfect. Especially if you have a triple chainring, it'll be a little bit harder than with a double chainring. So you just want to play with that a bit. Now one final thing to remember is that you can actually make slight adjustments to your shifting by increasing or decreasing the cable tension. And you can do that on your road bike with this little barrel adjuster right here. If you notice, the shift cable comes out right here and ends up right here. So let's say you're having trouble shifting up into your big ring or bigger gear. That means you need a little bit more tension on the cable. All you have to do when you're riding, just reach down here on to the correct side of your bike to get your front derailleur cable. And then you'll just turn that barrel adjuster counterclockwise slightly, and that puts a little more tension on the cable, which should help you move that front derailleur up there for a crisp shift. Now if you're having trouble getting the chain off of the big chain ring and shifting to a smaller gear, you might actually want to turn the barrel adjuster clockwise, which will put a little more slack into the cable and make it easier for the derailleur to drop down and drop your chain back to the small ring. Now between the adjustments in the shop and the adjustments on the road, you should be able to get your front derailleur working properly with those few adjustments.